Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Kazerman, Vice President of Government Relations at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to IssuesWatch Live. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping announcements. If you have a colleague who wasn't able to attend this session, we'll be rebroadcasting it on March 22nd at noon. If you have any questions during our presentation, please enter them in the Q&A box on your screen. We will try to answer questions that are submitted during the live presentation. We'll try and do this throughout the program, though we may not be able to address all questions. Questions submitted during the replay will be answered via the Q&A module. Finally, throughout the broadcast, you will see attendance checks pop up on your screen. Be sure to click those green check marks each time in order to receive your CPE credit. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into several components of Governor Murphy's proposed budget for New Jersey's 2023 fiscal year, which he released on March 8th. The legislature will now review it, and the final budget has to be signed by June 30th. As has been the case since COVID hit, this is not a normal budget drafted in normal times. The state finds itself flush with billions of extra dollars. Revenues are projected to come in $4.5 billion over budget in fiscal year 2022. There's the $4 billion we borrowed when the COVID pandemic first arrived, and there's also $3 billion in unused American Rescue Plan money. Just to add to that, we can also expect in the next few years $12.2 billion from the federal infrastructure law that was passed. In my entire life, I have never seen the state awash in so much money. I doubt you have either, Dale or Rich. And I think once all this federal money is used, I don't think we'll ever see this again, at least not in our lifetime. But anyway, to get us started, here are some budget highlights. The proposed budget is $49 billion, an increase of 5.6% over the fiscal year 2022 budget enacted on July 1st of last year. It assumes revenues for the current fiscal year will be $4.5 billion higher than originally projected. The total funds balance, including the rainy day fund, is decreased from $6.2 billion to $4.2 billion. And, you know, what's interesting is, and Rich pointed this out to me, if you look at the newspapers, they keep talking about the budget surplus being doubled or almost doubled, $2.2 million to $4 billion. But actually, they forgot to tell us that the rainy day fund, there was $4 billion in it, and now there's none. So we really lost $2 billion in surplus. Anyway, the good news is there's no tax increases. Under a new property tax relief program called Anchor, relief to homeowners and renters is increased by $500 million to $900 million. It will benefit about 1.8 million homeowners and renters. Over 3 years, it will rise to a $1.5 billion program annually. There's a $650 million increase in the school funding formula from $9.35 billion to $10 billion. There is an additional $68 million for preschool education aid. There's $430 million that has been allocated for new school construction and capital maintenance, and another $400 million for higher education construction. The proposed budget includes a $6.8 billion pension payment, making this the second consecutive annual payment that meets the actuarially determined contribution. Also included is a $1.3 billion deposit into the Debt Defeasance and Prevention Fund that will raise the fund balance to $5 billion. There's about $150 million for small business relief, which includes $50 million for the state's Main Street Recovery Program, and $300 million from the New Jersey share of the Federal American Rescue Act plan is allocated to build 3,300 new affordable housing units. Off budget, the state has still not spent about half of its $6.2 billion in ARP funds, that's the American Rescue Plan funds. It will also be receiving, like I said before, about $12 billion in federal infrastructure money. And sorry that took so long, folks, but we recently surveyed NJCPA members about the proposed budget, and 54% said that the proposed budget would make the economy worse over the long term. To discuss what all of this means for New Jersey, I'm joined today by Dale Florio, Princeton Public Affairs Group. Dale is considered one of the top lobbyists in New Jersey and has worked for the NJCPA as our contract lobbyist, him and Dave Smith, for 20-some-odd years. Welcome, Dale. I am also joined by Richard Keevy, a distinguished executive in residence at the Rutgers School of Planning and Public Policy. He's also a lecturer at Princeton University. Rich brings a unique perspective, having served as New Jersey's budget director and comptroller under two different governors, one from each political party. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Before we turn the budget analysis over to the experts, I want to give you my take in 4 sentences, and I'll leave it up to Rich and Dale to correct me wherever they think I'm wrong. All in all, I think it's a fiscally responsible budget. Regarding taxes, the good news is that there are no tax hikes. The bad news is that there are no tax cuts. I don't think there's enough aid for small businesses. And I also think there are no reforms to the state's pension and benefits programs, which will continue to eat up about 20% of the state budget. Oh, and one last thing, a disclaimer of sorts. If I happen to say something negative about a lawmaker or lawmakers in general, it doesn't mean I'm impugning their integrity. It's just a disagreement about policy. Take my word for it, the vast majority of New Jersey's lawmakers are smart, very smart, hardworking, and well-intentioned. So now on to our experts. Rich, what do you think? Overall, is this a good budget, a bad budget, or somewhere in between?
Well, I would have to say it's a pretty good budget. I think you cover most of the highlights of it. I'll have a few additional observations I want to pass on, but we have a good surplus, maybe a little bit lower than what it was, what it's going to be in the current year. We're going to be down $2 billion, but we could chat a little bit about that computation in a few minutes. But let me just refresh for some people who may not follow the state budget all the time. 47% of all the spending that's in the budget is for property tax relief or state aid. It's money that the state is sending out to municipalities, school districts, and to individuals. And then there's another 28%, again, that the state is sending out to other folks to purchase services. For example, the most expensive area in that is the Medicaid program and the Affordable Care Act and higher education and transit subsidies, assistance for people with developmentally disabled, mental health. All those programs are run by nonprofits or other entities other than the state, and we're providing the money. Another 5% is for debt service. We chat a little bit about that, about what the state has done to reduce the overall debt of the state. And finally, about 20% of the budget is what I would call the operating budget of the state. Money that's spent to run the day-to-day operations of the state. And of course, the fundamental new program that the governor has emphasized here is the expanded homestead rebate. $2 billion of direct services goes entirely for property tax relief. And the new program, also very new, changing the old homestead rebate to a new one. And based upon one's income, there's a payment out to those people. And we can chat about that as we go into more details. The school aid is interesting because there's been a lot of controversy about what districts are getting money and what districts are not getting money, and whether there should be money for certain districts who were decreased in funding. My take on that, again, we could discuss it later, is that it's funding the formula as laid out met the constitutional requirements. So those districts who have more need based upon they have less income and less wealth based upon property value, they get more money of the state government. And those districts who can raise money on their own get less money. And as Jeff pointed out, this is the largest school aid budget that I have ever seen. And of course, all that money goes back to state and local governments. And as you also mentioned, the pension fund is again funded for the second time to meet the ARC, the annual required contribution. They haven't done that for a long, long time. I have to say, the last time we fully funded it was back when I was a budget director almost 25 years ago. So that's good. And we're defeasing the bonds that were, I might have to say, when we spoke about this last year, I said that it was a mistake for the state to issue the bonds for operating purposes. Their retort to that is, well, now we're going to defease other bonds, so we'll kind of make it neutral, so to speak. A couple other things that are worth commenting about, and that is the appropriations are $1.7 billion greater than current revenues. So that could be a problem in the long run. But we do have a good surplus, and I would say the governor has really stepped out to help the property tax owner. One final observation. I might say to the governor, you should have given more property tax relief to the folks with lower income, as opposed to funding property tax rebates up to people with $250,000. But that's a personal view. And I think the governor's view probably was, well, I want to give as wide a property tax relief as I can, not only to those who are struggling, but also those with higher incomes, because they do have higher property taxes. So it's a well-structured budget, good property tax relief, lots of state aid, good social programs, expanding the Medicaid program, lots of aid for those folks who need assistance, including people who are people who are coming in from other countries who are not quite American yet. But they need assistance, and the governor has put money in there for that purpose too. So I think a well-rounded, pretty structured budget. The governor wants to expand the rebate program over the next couple of years. That's a good goal, and I think it's worth stating that it's a goal. Whether or not be able to finance that over the next 3 years, yet to be determined. So let me stop there, Jeff.
Thanks, Rich. So Dale, how about you? Is this good, bad, somewhere in the middle budget, in your opinion?
Well, Professor Keevy provides the former inside OMB director approach, and he articulates it very well. My contribution is more on the political side. So anytime a governor can say, and we're not going to raise taxes, people automatically stamp it as a fiscally responsible budget. And you're right. These are unprecedented times. In my career, I have never, ever seen this kind of money available to a governor and to the legislature. And as you said, we'll never see it again. Most of the time, you're scrounging how you're going to make ends meet, what line items are going to get reduced, and should you consider tax increases. So if there was a time that New Jersey should consider putting a 2-year budget together, this would be the time. Because we tend to look, we write these budgets in 1-year increments, and we're not focused on fiscal year the following year. And the ARPA dollars are not going to be here. And now would be the time for the legislature and the governor to tackle the 2 pressing issues that will still be with us once these funds are depleted. And as we get into it today, you will find out where it's going to go. And yes, in 2 years, we'll be singing a different song. And the 2 issues are pension reform and school funding formula reform. Rich appropriately pointed out that the governor's funding the existing school funding formula, and that's fine. The problem is that formula is a creature of 2008, and so much has changed in many of our school districts. Over 200 school districts are going to get less in aid this year than they did the year before. So again, the districts, the number of kids, the number of teachers needed, it all has shifted. But therein lies the political dilemma. And but unless we address pension and school funding formula, we will be singing a different song in 2 years. Now would be the time to do that.
Thanks, Dale. The governor, who we've been talking about, I guess we should, he's the guy who proposed the budget. He had a lot to say himself about his budget's fiscal soundness. So let's watch a clip of what he had to say.
None of what we aim to do going forward would be possible without the impacts of the past 4 budgets in firming up our state's fiscal foundation, meeting our obligations, and prudently investing in our future. We were once a AAA bond-rated state. We were looked at as a model for principled fiscal stewardship. We were considered a smart bet and a safe investment. Over several decades, across administrations of both parties, we had gotten away from that. We've had nothing but a string of downgrades, 11 of which were received under just the previous administration. Last week, happily, we received direct proof that the financial course we are following is the right one, with the news that Moody's upgraded our credit rating. If you can't remember the last time we got a Moody's upgrade, it might be because you weren't born yet. Moody's has only upgraded New Jersey once before, in 1977.
Dale, do you think that this is a fiscally responsible budget?
Well, just in listening to the clip, Jeff, regarding the bond agencies, unless you do the history of these things, our credit rating has been dropped, by 2 of 4 rating agencies since the governor came into office. 1 out of 4 increased our rating, and the 4th has us at the same rating as when the governor came into office. That means that half the rating agencies think our budget is structurally not in great shape. One thinks that we're no better than when the governor came into office, and one thinks it's better. So back to my point that our budget structurally remains a problem, camouflaged by pandemic dollars and revenues that exceeded expectations. Reminding everybody that based on tax increases the governor did in his first term. So, again, I think there's plenty of there's clouds out beyond the horizon, maybe 2 years, but we shouldn't be giddy about how good things are. And I think the governor, if he had provided a little bit more history on the rating agencies, you could see that really Moody's is the only one that gave us a bump.
Yeah, Dale, it's interesting what you said is exactly kind of what I think, that all this fiscal cushion is really just because we got all these billions of dollars, and I'd be kind of shocked if we were still doing fiscally responsible budgets 5 years from now. So, Rich, what do you think? Is this fiscally responsible budget?
I think in general it is, but I want to pick up a point that Dale made, which is very, very interesting and a good point about a 2-year budget. There are 26 states that do biannual budgets. And it would be very interesting because, as I mentioned earlier, the revenues are about $1.5 billion less than expenditures projected for next year. So that suggests, as Dale was leading towards, a problem for the following year. Furthermore, it would really be good if the state would provide a current services projection as to what the budget looks like over the next 2 or 3 years, making assumptions for revenue and making assumptions for funding those programs that have to be. And people would look at that over a 2 or 3 year period of time and say, oh, maybe we can't quite do all the things that the governor now says he wants to do. Or maybe the conclusion would be it looks pretty good. So there are still out-year projections that are at least somewhat troubling to me at the moment. Having said that, I do want to make another observation. The revenue estimating from the state for the last couple, 3 years has been, to say the least, not very accurate. They have been way underestimated. And as you pointed out, this year's budget in the current year has been revised upward in revenues significantly. And a quick look at the next projections for fiscal 2023 would also suggest to me that they're on the lower side of the equation. So from one point of view, that's good. You should be very conservative and cautious. But that also argues for Dale's point, well, let's make this a 2 or 3 year viewpoint so we can better understand what we're committing ourselves to. The whole school aid formula is something worth a discussion. We can do it later perhaps, but as you may or may not know, 72% of all spending in this state is at the local level, not by the state government. Because remember, so much money of the state goes back to local governments. So when you add that together with the $30 billion or $31 billion of property taxes, that's where the money is spent. School districts, municipalities, counties, principally school districts. And the state spends 28% of all the money in the state. So when I tell folks that, they always raise their eyebrows and say, well, that's not true. The state government is the big entity. I said, well, they are the big entity, but that's not where the spending is. So all of those comments from my point of view would say we always need to be looking forward over a longer period of time before we can make any really good sound judgments. One final point before I leave. The last time the state had a AAA credit rating, I was the budget director for both Kane and Florio. And in Governor Florio's second year, the rate was reduced from a AAA down to AA++. And of course, that was a big thrust of us. Well, we lost our AAA credit rating. But AA++ was pretty good. And as been suggested by Dale and other folks, it's been steadily going down over the last 25 years and bounced back this year, I think responsibly by Moody's, who said, yeah, you're a lot better than you have been being rated. And as also Dale pointed out, the other two haven't jumped on the bandwagon yet. So we got a lot of mixed financial activities going on out there, and we'll have to just wait and see how it develops.
Thanks, Rich. We don't have time to get into it, but one of the other interesting things that I think most people miss is that when you throw in, they think of the $45 billion or whatever dollars in state spending is like, well, that's what is spent by government. But when you throw in local government and federal funds, I think we're talking like over $100 billion. But that's a topic for another day. Let's move on to property taxes, which is, as everybody knows, a perennial issue in New Jersey. And as we mentioned before, the governor has proposed an expansive new property tax relief program called Anchor. And honestly, I don't remember what that stands for, but so we'll just go with Anchor. And this is what he had to say about that program in his budget address.
Moreover, this budget takes on the most stubborn affordability challenge that has faced our state for decades: property taxes. Today, I am putting forward the Anchor Property Tax Relief Program to deliver direct property tax relief to nearly 1.8 million middle and working class and senior households, whether they are homeowners or renters, households, by the way, in which well more than half of our residents live. Anchor formally stands for Affordable New Jersey Communities for Homeowners and Renters. Through Anchor, more than 1.15 million homeowners with incomes up to $250,000 will receive direct relief averaging nearly $700. More than 600,000 renters making up to $100,000 will receive as much as $250 in relief. And then over the next 2 years, we intend to continue building up the anchor program until it meets the funding and relief levels promised by the state's 2007 property tax relief law. When that day comes, we will be providing direct property tax relief for homeowners that will average more than $1,150 per household.
So, Rich, and I think we alluded to this before you did, you can clearly see that this is an extremely ambitious program. Do you think it'll survive the next economic downturn?
Well, that's the big question. To think we're going to grow it up to $1 billion, almost $1.2 billion, as the governor suggests, is a good goal. My reading of the numbers would say that would be very, very difficult to do. But I would be more critical of how the money is being allocated. I'm kind of the point of view of people at the lower income level who own homes and or renters who are in lower income should be getting more money than the governor has proposed. The governor, for example, people making up to $250,000 will get an average $550 check back. And somebody who's making under $100,000 might get $700. I don't know whether I would tilt it that way, but that's a matter of philosophy. And my philosophy says if you had a really good circuit breaker program, you would be giving more money back to those people with lower incomes struggling with paying property taxes. So I have two views to it. It's going to be hard to extend it into the future. And secondly, I would have reformatted it differently and given more money to people who live in homes with a lot less income than $250,000.
Thanks, Rich. Dale, same question for you. Do you think it'll survive the next economic downturn? I have a very strong feeling you're going to say no. And also, do you think that this anchor program is a good program? Would you make significant changes or reduce it if you were governor?
First of all, that's the last job I would want, to be the governor. But that being said, listen, there are a lot of smart people listening to us today that deal with numbers all the time. And this program will be no different than any other program. I think Governor Murphy's anchor program is now the fifth or sixth renaming of the take it out of one pocket and put it in another. The issue of surplus and then using rebates to give money back to people always begs the question, are you better off to lower sales, income taxes, or are you better off doing the rebate? Politicians over the years, both parties, have decided it's better to do rebates because if I'm raising taxes or a sales tax, that affects everybody. But if I do rebates and I've got to cut them back, it's money I'm not getting back today. It's like you're filing your tax return. Oh, I'm getting money back. The rebate, same thing. Well, okay, my rebate check now was $1,000. Now it's going down to $500. But at least I'm getting $500. So, in their minds politically, it's different. But let's keep in mind, right? This program it increases the spending by over $550 million from last year. These rebates will not be provided until May of 2023, conveniently right before the legislative elections, primary-wise in June, and then the fall legislative elections.
I'm sure it's just a coincidence.
I am sure. Maybe it's a cash flow problem. I don't know. But this overall number is 1/8 of the $4.6 billion overtax collection in the current year, while the administration keeps the remainder, for unknown spending. And you can talk to Democrats and Republicans in the legislature. They don't know. I mean, there is no plan for that off-budget dollars. So, if you're getting back maybe 2% of overall property tax contributions with a 2% anchor program, do the math. It's not much, and it's certainly not sustainable going forward.
Thanks, Dale. We actually have a couple of questions from the audience. So here's the first one. Haven't we played the homestead rebate shell game? I think you just said that, Dale. Haven't we played this game for years and not made the state more affordable? Wouldn't it be smarter to use these rare cash flush times to make investments that would actually help reduce expenses? And Rich, let's start with you, and then I'll hand that over to Dale.
Well, I don't disagree with Dale's point of view at all. This is kind of where we go up, where we go down, et cetera, et cetera. I guess I would ask the person who made the suggestion here, exactly what is he talking about in terms of making things better? We are going to sink a lot of money into infrastructure improvements by way of the large amount of federal money coming in. So that's really good. Perhaps the author is suggesting that we would take some excess monies and further expand infrastructure improvements. And I think that's a good idea too. I guess I come from the point of view is each year we need to challenge a budget that's balanced and has sufficient resources that will allow it to continue at that level into the next few years. And that's why I argue for a type of budget that projects it every year for 3 or 4 years down, so that the taxpayer and the governor and the legislature knows what's coming up for the next few years and can make better judgments. So while we may be flush today, we're probably not going to be flush in the next few years. And we have to be more cautious. There's a lot of information technology problems with the state.
Yeah.
So that gentleman who raised that question might say, well, fix the unemployment insurance system. Fix the various tax systems that the state administers. There's where you should be sinking with some money so that in the future, the systems that the state depend upon, particularly the motor vehicle and the unemployment, are better than what they are today. And I would buy into that logic. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Right, right. Interesting that you mentioned the IT problems. I think both of you probably remember Mark Pfeiffer, who, well, you work with him, Rich, right, at the Blaustein School. And he's former director of the Division of Local Government Services. And I was talking to him about this very IT issue. And we're actually, which is a huge problem in the state, and we are actually most likely going to be doing a report with him on this that we're going to start working on in the summer. So let's move on to our next topic. And this is a real sore spot with the business community, at least every business group that I've heard from. And this is small business aid. As we all know, small businesses suffered very hard times during the pandemic. Up where I live, there's so much abandoned retail space that, you know, you could be forgiven for thinking we're in the grips of the Great Depression, which is, honestly, that's what it looked like to me, especially during the height of the coronavirus. In my opinion, there's not enough aid for small business in the budget, and there seems to be little recognition, and this has been, I think, for the past 4 years in both, particularly the governor's office, but the legislature too. There seems to be little to no recognition that these small businesses and big businesses, they provide jobs for the very people that the governor and the legislature are rightly trying to help. And these businesses also generate tax revenues, which go for state assistance programs that, again, helps these very same people as well as others. So, Dale, what are your thoughts? Is there enough funding or aid for small businesses in this budget? And I believe there's about, and of course it depends on who you talk to, about 150 million, 50 million in that Main Street program, and then another 100 million scattered within different things. So, Dale, what are your thoughts? Is there enough aid for business in this budget?
Well, I guess, Jeff, it really depends on where you sit and what you consider to be small business. I was working on a piece of legislation the other day which would provide tax credits for small businesses in terms of winterization. And it was set at 10 individuals, 10 or less. And right intention, but the sweet spot's probably anywhere between 10 and 50 in terms of what small business is. You have to go back to the pandemic and the dollars that were flowing from the federal government over the last 2 years, and that were geared toward providing support, in this case, business people. I give the governor credit. He and his team put together a lot of programs through the EDA for this purpose. The problem I kept hearing from a lot of businesses, though, the grants were very small because they tried to spread them around, and it really played more to that very small person, that small business, right, 10 or less. And if you're a restaurant, not only could you not find people, but getting grant dollars, which might help you retain people, would have been very helpful. And so you're anywhere between you're certainly north of 10, and you could be south of 100. So the only other comment I'll make is that when you put your first slide up that showed how the major dollars were being distributed, you had small business left, and it was the smallest number you had up on your slide, 150 million. Everybody else was in the billions for this, billions for that. Arguably, we still have federal dollars that were intended to help entities, individuals get back on their feet, and that's what the money should be used for, as a kind of a release point, an endemic, as everybody's now saying. And I'm not sure that's the case. So 150 million compared to what else you see in the budget doesn't seem like a lot of money to me.
Yeah, Dale, that's exactly how I feel. And it's funny what you were saying about 10 or less employees. Whenever I'm asked or somebody says, yeah, but there's money going for small businesses here or there. And I always say, well, that's only if you're like a micro company, that's in the inner city. And again, I mean, sure, we want to help them. There's nothing wrong with that. But right. I really, honestly, do not understand how so many people or lawmakers can't see when it's so clear that businesses are a key part of keeping people employed. But and so that brings me.
Yeah, I was just going to say one other comment. And, you had to look at what other states were doing. Other states were actually doing significant sector programs. So in Pennsylvania, hotels had access to millions of dollars to sustain them through the pandemic when room rentals were very low. New Jersey did not. That's the other thing. New Jersey did not do what I would call sector rescue plans. It was all kind of generic business. So you saw what was going on in other states, and you just wondered why you couldn't do it here.
Right. Same thing with the unemployment insurance fund and helping with that. So, Rich, now here's my question to you. After all those negative things you heard me say, and I think Dale said some of them too, am I being too harsh on lawmakers as far as, relief to small businesses? And let's say small businesses is 50 people and under, and not just 10 and under. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've always been of this view. We got a lot of money from the federal government to do a lot of different things. And I think the last number I saw was about $3.5 billion has not been utilized yet, and it's not in the state budget as far as I can determine. And that's the kind of money that can be used for these kinds of issues, the small businesses. We don't need any of that $3.5 billion, in my judgment, back into the state budget. We're pretty socially oriented budget in New Jersey, which from my point of view is good. But we have all these small businesses struggling out there, and we have this sum of money sitting there that can be maximized and used for small business development. And a lot of that money, I think, by definition, will be one time to get them started again, back on their feet again. And that's exactly a good use of this kind of federal money, of which was provided to the state. And I don't know, as Dale pointed out, I'm not sure why we're not utilizing it. Some of my friends on the Republican side of the equation make the same point. We have these monies we should be using them for this purpose and not sitting on them hoping to use it perhaps to help balance the budget in 2 or 3 years from now. So that's my quick take on it. And I have to quickly say I am no expert on what small businesses need to get them back up on the return to business front.
So it sounds like we kind of are all in agreement on that, and we're all kind of baffled. So nobody's got the answer for me. I haven't found one person yet who's been able to tell me what the lawmakers are up to or what they think they're accomplishing by ignoring businesses when they play such a key role in keeping people employed. But anyway, I guess I'll have to keep working.
Can I just jump in on that? One thing I wanted to mention was it in talking to many legislators from both sides. Of course, Republicans would rather see you cut rates. Democrats would rather hold on to the money, save some of it. But there's also a sense, I think, by the leadership that they are carefully watching these unsustainable program proposals that the governor is suggesting, because legislators tend to be around longer than governors. And they know that someday they will not have the same access to funds like they have now. So that's where there's a lot of conversation about infrastructure programs. Rich mentioned information technology. It's not sexy. It doesn't get you votes. But those are the kinds of things that I think they're thinking about, if not in the budget, certainly asking the governor to use those dollars that have not been committed for those short-term needs that will serve everybody's benefit in the future.
Yeah, and actually, Dale, that's one of the good things that I've seen. Once we got that money, the ARP money, both sides seem to have come together in, and this has really been for real, I haven't seen otherwise, to use it for, responsible projects where there's not going to have to be ongoing spending every year forward. But like Rich was saying, we have all these billions of dollars. Why is it more of it going to small business aid? Well, I don't know. Still a mystery to me. But let's move on to taxes. Especially it's tax season now. The business community, as well as others, are pleased to see that for the second year in a row, there are no tax hikes. However, in my view, in my opinion, with the billions floating around, there should be some tax cuts in a state that has the highest or almost highest taxes in the country. And there were many tax hikes done during the first 4 years, the first 3 years of Governor Murphy's governorship. So I would have liked to have seen some tax cuts. But Rich, am I being unrealistic? Perhaps our taxes are not really as high as some people say, and am I really being unrealistic, even if they are high, and urging the lowering of taxes?
Well, you might even guess which direction I'm coming from. I'm not in favor of reducing existing tax levels. I'm not going to argue that the state doesn't have high taxes. We do. We have a lot of high services provided in the state, and we do a lot of things that other states don't do. And depending upon your point of view, some people might say, yeah, well, we shouldn't be doing those kind of things, and therefore cut the taxes. So I don't come from that point of view. And from a strictly financial budget point of view, once you start cutting taxes of a significant amount this year because we have a, quote, surplus, the next couple of years comes along and that money isn't there, which I think would be a mistake. I have to agree that there's people on the left and the right of that argument. The more conservative view would say, well, we don't have the money because we cut the taxes, then cut the programs. And then again, you'd have to come back and discuss what it is you're reducing. And I would say, since the majority of this money has been going for things that I think are important, other people might have a different view, I don't think it's a good idea to cut taxes. You'll lead to problems in the long run. People will turn around and then we'll have taxes going up. So I'm not concerned about the fact that we didn't cut taxes. I personally, as a as a taxpayer, don't mind the tax rate being high for the folks over $1 million. And I would argue for things like, I saw some of the comments from the people who write in there about Robin Hood Rich, who wants to take money from the rich and give it to the poor. I'm not quite that way, but I think a good tax structure is important for the state, and we shouldn't be monkeying around with reducing rates and running into problems in the long run. So that's a long story that says, don't cut the taxes.
Well, Rich, you're right. That's exactly what I expected you to say. Based on our prior shows on this issue, which I think we've been doing for 4 or 5 years. So, Dale, over to you.
I have to quickly say that I worked as a budget director for a Republican governor and a Democratic governor. So.
That's right. You're not. This is Rich Keevy coming from an independent viewpoint.
There you go.
And that's true. So, Dale, once all this federal money runs out, do you think we're going to see more tax hikes? On the flip side, although Rich doesn't want them, do you think we'll ever see tax cuts and in our lifetimes? I mean, not just looking over the next year or two. So do you think we'll see tax hikes again once this federal money runs out and let's say it's not a great economic year? And on the flip side, do you think we'll ever see tax cuts, I don't know, in the next 10, 20 years?
I don't see that, Jeff. I mean, we're already at the top end. I mean, Rich can fill in the blank here, but I think we have the highest corporate rates. Our income rates now, you know, I'm all for graduated rates. If you make more, you know, I don't have a problem. You pay a little bit more. But I think we're at the top end on that as well. So at some point, you know, it's unsustainable unless you talk about, you know, where you should be looking at how you're spending your money, right? When you have good years like we have, the pressure to look at the expenditure side becomes less of a focus. So if we're going to keep the rates the same, you know, we should be able to work within that. But I think that's where you see Republicans and Democrats need to spend more time. And I think the legislature will, but they need to spend more time looking at, you know, how we're spending our money and be willing to make adjustments each year. And that's, you know, that's one of the failings of the political system, that they don't do that because cutting isn't fun, or reallocating funds to different programs, not fun. And so I don't see a reduction in rates, but we're hoping that they would take a look at, you know, how they're spending their money and not be afraid to move it around to priorities, because priorities shift.
Right. That's a good point. So let's look at the pension system and the, you know, for public workers and their benefits. The budget includes a $6.8 billion pension payment, which, as Rich said, it meets the actuarially required pension contribution. This is the second year in a row. And groups across the political spectrum have applauded that, which is, you know, to get them all on the same page is unusual. So with 6.5 or 6.8 billion in the pension payment, and then health benefits are a few billion more, I think it's fair to say that combined these benefits make up roughly 20% of the budget, which I think is much, much higher than, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. I mean, a much higher percentage. So, Rich, the last time I looked, and this was before the pandemic, I believe our pension and benefits systems were in worse shape than just about any other state. Now, is that still true? And do you happen to know what the numbers are for the state's unfunded pension and health benefits?
I can give you some background. And before I start, the way to look at this quickly is to go to the last state's official prospectus. In that prospectus, there's a whole bunch of information about the pension system. So the last one I looked at was the, I think it was in early January. So based upon that data, which is pretty up to date, and the state has to have full disclosure in these official statements, we're at 50% funding. So we're still one of the worst funded states in the country. And if you look at the charts that project those things out, if we continue to meet the ARC requirement, and if the projections in terms of what we think costs are going to be into the future are correct, and they're projected by the actuary, we won't get the full funding until about the year 2045. So probably I won't be around in 2045.
Yes, you will.
But if the state continues to meet its ARC, and if the investment earnings continue on the average of 7%, and if we use proper discount rates for projecting future expenditures, that's how long it's going to take for the state to get to full funding. Is it critical that we get to full funding? I don't think so. Is it critical that we fund the ARC? Yes, I do. One other point before I get off. I was part of the what I would call Senator Sweeney's project that looked at future pension costs. And I agreed with the senator that we ought to change our pension system for new employees. It's too expensive. It costs a lot of money, and when you go out to, if it takes 20 years to get back up to 100%, that's not going to happen because there's going to be intervening problems that develop. So Senator's proposal was if you're a new employee, you have to go into a modified IRA system. We're not going to change anything for the existing pensioners, but we do need it for new people. So that's the only real solution to the long-term pension problem. It's better than when it was. In the long run, it looks pretty good. But in the short term, we need to make more radical changes. We have similar problems on the health care. They're underfunded also. And as you probably know, we fund the pensions, the health care on a pay-as-you-go basis. There's no money set aside for the long-term cost impact. And the out-year liabilities for the healthcare system, not as large as the pension, but they're pretty big if they were on an actuarial basis.
Right. That's right. I forgot about that.
Hey, Jeff,
yes, sir.
Looking at some of the comments in the box, I know some folks are tired of hearing about the pension, but I agree with Director Keevy there. That is the issue that drives and is the underlying belly to budgets year after year after year. I mean, that's the warning sign. If anybody takes anything away from today's session, that's what needs to be done. Political will, very difficult to say. And the professor might be able to back me up on this, but the pension system and funding it has always been, for the most part, a bipartisan issue. Everyone acknowledges that the state needs to make that contribution. And honestly, the Governor Murphy's proposal basically followed Chris Christie's plan of increasing the payment over a 10-year schedule when it would finally hit full payment. Murphy, to his credit, actually reached the goal 1 year earlier. So then in year 9 versus year 10. So, but keep in mind, he raised taxes early in his administration, and he borrowed $4 billion as well. So would he have gotten there without those things? I don't know, but this was a 10-year plan that was in place. He did hit it a year early. He should actually, with the amount of money he has, he should make prepayments.
Yes. So another question for you, Dale, and I have an answer to this, but I'm not going to give it. I want to see what you have to think. And I think I know the answer. But anyway, with the governor so close to the unions, the public worker unions, and he obviously has a real ideological commitment to their cause and the issues they support, do you think we're ever going to see any significant reforms to pensions and benefits while he's still in office?
I mean, I would say unlikely. I mean, listen, he worked at Goldman Sachs. He understands numbers. But we all, those of us that practice political science understand constituent politics. And, those are his constituents, and especially the teachers union. And they're not looking to change anything about their pension program or their lifetime health benefits. It's hard. Chris Christie was the first governor in a long time that actually did deals with a Democratic legislature. I'm guessing it probably takes that again. You need somebody of the opposite party and a willingness to kind of dig in and deal with the majority of the other party, even if it were flipped. I mean, if the legislature was Republican, you'd probably need to elect a Democratic governor to kind of get something done like that, or school funding. I mean, those are two third-rail issues that haven't been addressed. So the short answer, no, I don't see it. But this governor is no different than any other governor. A lot of them play constituent politics, and it makes it tough. But at some point, This becomes unsustainable. Right.
And although that's something I've been hearing for 30 years, so I guess we'll have to wait until things actually blow up, and then it really will be unsustainable. But
hey, Jeff, let me jump in 1 quick second to augment what Dale was saying right on target. There's a movement, if that's the right verb, among the union groups that want to reinstate the COLA. That was removed by Governor Christie with the consent of the Democratic legislature. So, and that's to the benefit of the long-range projections. We don't have to worry about COLAs. But if that gets reinstated, that's just going to exacerbate the problem. And that movement develops because, well, it looks like we got a lot of money sitting around. So let's reinstate the COLA, says the pensioners. That would be a big mistake. We want to keep the system as it is for existing employees. In my judgment, change it for new employees, and don't give out COLAs.
Right, and that, by the way, Rich, is exactly where the NJCPA Society stands. And Ralph Thomas, our CEO now, was on that Path to Progress commission with you. You probably met him. So, Dale,
Correct.
Let me ask you a few political questions regarding the budget. First of all, do you see the legislature making any significant changes to the governor's proposed budget?
Not really. I do think there is an interest in making sure that, especially places like the Department of Labor, have the money that they need to fund infrastructure improvements to their technology platform. The commissioner came before the Senate Labor Committee the other day and received a lot of challenging questions. So I think there's that, but I don't see any major changes. Jeff, I think that the governor will probably hold out the fig leaf or whatever that there are ARPA dollars here. So if there are other projects that we need to take a look at, we can talk about them after this budget is done. Not the best way to handle taxpayer dollars, but I think that'll keep the legislature in its place, and you won't see very many different changes.
Okay, Dale, here's another one for you. The Republicans picked up 7 seats, maybe it was 6, you I'm sure would know, picked up 7 seats, let's say, in the November elections. Will they be able to use that? Democrats still have a comfortable majority in both houses. But do you think Republicans will be able to use that, the pickup in seats, as leverage to get a budget maybe a little bit more to their liking? Does that give them any real political leverage?
They should have more leverage, whether it's applicable to this coming budget, yet to be seen. There's the split now in the Assembly is 46-34. So, and you have Democrats in what I would call swing districts, especially coming off of this last election cycle. Elections are about momentum. President Biden's approval rating in New Jersey this past November was not very good. In fact, it was below what Governor Murphy was polling at. And so those wins really impacted a few of the races. And now we're facing midterm elections, and the president's numbers aren't any better. So, politicians on both sides are watching for that. So that combined with, again, you only need 7 Democrats to say, hey, I like what the Republicans are saying. So it'll make for better legislation. I mean, it's better for us as taxpayers if they discuss the issues more, if they are more willing to compromise as opposed to just going along. So that's better. And in the Senate, it's a little tighter as well. So it should be good for the taxpayer when you have government that's not totally one party or the other.
Right. So following up on an issue we discussed briefly, which was, if there's enough money in the budget for small business, do you think during these budget negotiations that will lead up until, it's signed in late June, do you think the business community will be able to persuade the legislature to add the money that the governor didn't to the budget for the unemployment insurance trust fund to give some sort of relief, or do you think they'll be able to persuade the legislature to at least fight for more small business funding? In other words, will the legislature try and do some of this small business aids and grants that the governor did not put in his budget?
So there is a big push, and I think there's a good chance the business committee will be successful on the unemployment issue. I mean, if there's one issue that all employers can get around, it's certainly that one. Individual grants, low-interest loan programs are difficult because they tend to be generic. The legislature, the governor, as I said previously, did not do sector programs. They just said business generally, and again, they used a small number of employees, and the grant sizes weren't that big. So I think our best hope, Jeff, is really on the unemployment side, and I think there is momentum for that, and the business community is certainly united there.
Thank you, Dale. So we mentioned a few times the unused American Rescue Plan Act money, ARPA, and we asked our members in a survey how the state should prioritize the spending of these funds to have the most impact. So here were the top 3 items. One was invest in infrastructure improvements. The second one was provide immediate relief to homeowners and tenants. And the third one, as we were just saying, replenish the unemployment insurance trust fund. So, Rich, what do you think about our members' priorities?
Well, they were the 3 that I would probably observe, too. Infrastructure is always a good thing to do. We got lots of infrastructure problems in the state. And I think we're doing enough for number 2, although based upon my comments, I would restructure it. And the unemployment insurance fund, the folks that I talk to who are, I guess, more on the Republican side, really want that to be done. In other words, if you put money into the unemployment fund, that means that the employer doesn't have to raise the taxes that much to fund the unemployment insurance, because there's a big deficit there. And under current law, as I understand it, the business community will have to be paying a lot of that to reduce it down again. So if we put the money into that, or a portion of it, that would reduce the impact on the business community. So that's probably, pretty high up on the structure of most business community people, I think. And I have no problem with that suggestion.
Thanks, Rich. So, Dale, how about you? What do you think of our members' priorities with this money? What they think it should go to?
Ditto. I agree with the professor there. And they're all doable, right? I mean, if I heard one thing from the legislature and the leadership, they like the idea of infrastructure improvements, right? And those programs, you invest the money in them. They're not out-year commitments once they're done, but they serve the public for a long time to come. So.
Okay, that makes 3 of us. I liked our members' priorities there also. So we're approaching the end of our broadcast. So let me ask you each for your closing thoughts about the budget and anything we might not have covered today. Rich, what are your thoughts? Let's start with you.
Well, I pretty much summarized what I previously said. You know, a more than acceptable budget. I would restructure the homestead rebate in a different format. Other people have different views about it. And I would like to really pick up on Dale's point. We need to look more carefully at the out years. A 2-year budget would be interesting. I mentioned 26 other states do it. And it would demand that the state look more into the future so that the taxpayer and the legislature would understand what it looks like in the next 2 or 3 years, as opposed to just focusing on year one. So if I could make one big change in the whole budgetary process, it would be to be keeping to look out for 2 or 3 years so that you don't make poor decisions in year one because you got a little extra money.
One thing about that, Rich, since that happens to be a big pet peeve of Ralph Thomas, our CEO, he's always talking about multi-year budgeting, and we don't have enough time to really get into it. But when you talk about a 2-3 year budget, you're talking about the appropriations being done?
This would be a projected long-range budget projection. It doesn't hold the state to anything. It doesn't hold the legislature to anything. It's the projection of what we think it looks like, says the executive branch. And then the legislature could see. Yep.
That is a good idea.
And one other point on that, you know, and this is a bad example to use, the federal government projects a 10-year budget every year, the Congressional Budget Office. Here's what it looks like. Not too hard to do. And despite that, you know, and it shows the massive deficits that are going up, the massive debt that's going up. You can clearly see it. You might argue back then, what good did it do? Well, at least you know what's going on.
Right. Yep. So, Dale, what are your final thoughts, or did we miss anything that you want to address?
No, I think on the substance, Jeff, I'll stand behind what Rich said. What I would pivot to is just, you know, going forward politically, you know, for the first time in over 10 years, we have a new leader in the state Senate. And, you know, for observers today, I mean, you can't overestimate the impact that will have for the next couple of years. It's huge. You know, we don't know, you know, where the Senate will go, what it will do. And the Senate is a very active participant in this process. So unanswered questions there. And, you know, we've talked about the budget all day and fiscal impact, but with the new leader, you won't necessarily see his fingerprints on this budget as much. But I think going forward, it could be different. The Assembly leadership is the same, but when you have a change like that, it is significant. The other thing to keep in mind is that you know, we don't get two-term governors that often in New Jersey. Chris Christie was a 2-term governor, but he spent his second 4 years essentially campaigning for president. There's talk that Governor Murphy is, you know, doing and saying some things that would suggest that he's going to do that. So will he be traveling? Will he be less focused on New Jersey? When a chief executive in New Jersey doesn't pay attention because of other distractions, that too has a significant impact on what goes on in the state. So those are two things to look for as we go forward here. A second-term governor who, you know, might be thinking about a presidential run, and a new Senate president.
Thanks, Dale. It always seems to me like every single or half the governors in the nation, certainly in New Jersey, always think, you know what, I would make a great president.
You know, and the reason for that, Jeff, I know the reason for that is because it's us and Virginia always have that governor's race after a presidential race, right? So the attention of politics nationally focuses in on Virginia and New Jersey. So they get a lot of attention, a lot gets written. I'm convinced that's the reason. It gives them that notoriety. So,
that's an ingenious insight there. I think you're right, because I can't recall, except for maybe John Corzine, a governor we had that wasn't thinking, man, I would be a great president. As a matter of fact,
Yep.
I heard that Jim McGreevey, like a week or two after he was elected, or maybe this was the day he was married, was looking out at the White House or something saying, you know what, I really should be there. But I'm sure you know more about that story, and I'm sure I kind of messed it up a little bit. But Rich, Dale, as always, I've learned a lot from you. Just learned a real lot from that insight you just gave us, Dale, and I'm going to put that out there as my own little observation, if you don't mind.
you're good.
And I'm sure our members have also learned a lot. And I thank both of you for joining us today. And I look forward to a year from now when we do this again. Maybe this time we'll do it in person. We've been doing it in Dale's very stately office across the street from the State House. So I look forward to hopefully next year we can do that. And thanks to all of you for our viewers, and I hope everybody has a great day.